everyone in here, the master of first times, the chick you want to keep up with, and the voice you want in your head, because I am the voice that tells you you can. Welcome to a new interview series that is part of the Maximize Your Life Summit series, where I am bringing you some incredible experts, authors, professionals, and speakers to dig deeper into the benefits of first times and new experiences. Let's go ahead and meet our guests. Joining me today is Marta Brzosko, and we are digging into the benefit of self-awareness. Marta is a writer and the founder of the Self-Awareness blog. She is also the author of the book Ego Friendly: Stop Treating Your Ego as the Enemy and Let It Guide Your Spiritual Growth. She advocates for developing self-awareness and mindfulness before improving ourselves. And I completely agree with that. She escapes her own tendencies to overthink by running in nature, drawing, and doing things for the first time. Welcome, Marta.
Well, hello. Thanks for having me. I'm really glad to be here.
I'm very excited to have you. Okay, so let's start with, why did you start your blog, the Self-Awareness blog?
I was looking for a common theme to my writing, and this word as a keyword just jumped at me because I was dabbing into mindfulness and psychology for a few years, and then I was looking for some central theme to it, really. And then I realized that with mindfulness you can be mindful of so many things, of the outside and of the inside and people around you, and but the core is really the relationship with yourself. So that's actually how I define self-awareness these days. That it's not so much, or it's not only just a skill or a competency that we have, but it's also the quality of the relationship that we have with ourselves.
Interesting. So definitely rolling quite a bit under the umbrella. So let's dig a little bit more into that, so that the audience has a understanding of where we are speaking and coming from when it comes to defining self-awareness. So for me, I define it really as everything, but the conscious knowledge and understanding of who you are and what made you who you are. So I'm saying your personality trait, your character, and particularly what you think, what you feel, and why you think and feel that way. And the understanding how you became that person, and then what drives you, your priorities, and being aware of really all of those things that make up who you are as a living entity. So do you have more to add to that definition or to clarify?
I think it's a pretty complete definition. To me, there's always this spiritual aspect to self-awareness as well. This is, I guess, the angle from which I'm coming at it, because to me, it's always felt like, less of a tangible, describable experience, and more like an experience of connection. So I feel that by noticing things within myself, like a thought, and as you said, maybe understanding where that thought is coming from because of this and that experience that I had in my childhood, like connecting those dots after a while of observing your inner world. To me, this information has two levels, I suppose. So one level is like this practical self-understanding that helps me navigate the world, and navigate how I show up in relationships, what kind of job might be suitable for me, this kind of practical stuff. And on the other hand, like a level deeper than that, there's also that experience of just noticing my own consciousness, I suppose. So noticing that, there's someone who is noticing these things, like that fleeting thought or a fleeting feeling. There's this remaining consciousness to that. So that again brings me back to this relationship with myself, because it feels like these two levels, the transient one, the passing one, and the, let's say, the constant one, the consciousness, it feels like they interact with each other. So that's what I mean by the relationship here. And it feels like it can have a lot of qualities, that relationship. And that's, I guess, where also our inner critic comes in, or inner nurturer, as I read this phrase somewhere as like opposition to the inner critic, and I really like that. And the fact that we don't just have the inner critical voice, but we can also have the inner nurturing voice that is maybe less talked about. So it's also how those two voices interact, and like what's the proportion of which voice we listen to. It's another like dimension that defines that quality of how we are with ourselves.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I like how you're kind of saying self-awareness is also really acknowledgement of yourself, of who you are, and that you are alive, and that you know, you have dreams, you have goals, you have ambitions, you have flaws, you have all of these qualities and things happening, and you need to acknowledge yourself for it. And I think, like, for me, the way then that I see that playing out is that self-awareness becomes the foundation to everything. So that's why, like, I'm a huge supporter and promoter, and I encourage action-based self-development through first time in your experiences. But I always start, so everything that I promote when it comes to self-development, everything starts with self-awareness. And I don't think you should move into self-development, self-improvement until you're self-aware, because then you go into a danger zone. So do you want to talk a little bit more of what you discovered that danger zone being?
Yeah, that's actually quite a big topic for me, because it's also connected to how self-awareness without that loving quality towards ourselves can sometimes be detrimental. So even before we go into that self-improvement, which I can feel that it very often comes from feeling inadequate and wanting to be like someone else and wanting to optimize our lives. At least this is the kind of narrative that I see, for example, in the blogging world, which is my world professionally right now. But even before we go into that improvement, what I've noticed within myself is that I have a lot of inner criticism inside of me. So talking about that inner critic and inner nurturer, in me, that inner critic is much stronger. And then if I don't consciously activate that nurturing voice, I can very easily go into self-awareness with this kind of attitude of noticing things that are flawed in me, and notice, oh, I'm insecure here. I said this mindlessly there. It feels like there's a very fine line between just noticing what's there and how I'm behaving and what I'm thinking, and going into, this is who I am. It's a failure, I guess it's not all people experience it. So this is obviously, I'm talking from my own experience. But yeah, so that's like the first, to me, that's the foundation, the self-awareness with that kind of loving kindness attitude, as it's called in Buddhism, for example. And then also, yeah, before going to self-improvement or personal development, or basically that kind of sphere where we are trying to change something about ourselves for good reasons, for good intentions, like to increase our well-being or to be a better partner. I think that having self-awareness before that helps us clarify, why are we even doing this? So am I going to work out because this is really deeply something that I want to do and change my health, maybe improve my fitness? Is it something that I like? Which place does it come from? I think this is it for me. Does it come from a place, I love myself and so I want to be healthier, I want to nurture my body? Or is it from a place, I hate myself and I need to lose weight, and this is how I'm going to almost punish myself? So I suppose if there's not enough self-awareness before going into self-improvement, this is kind of the danger that you referred to, maybe. And yeah, I went there a few times, and I'm suspecting that I will still go there. It also doesn't feel like it's a once checked, self-awareness level achieved, and from then on I'm fine. It's rather something that we need to monitor as we go, because we explore new parts of our lives, we go into new relationships, so it's like new areas gets get exposed to our awareness.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think self-awareness is an everyday continuous process because one, you're bombarded you're bombarded by so much information, and it has an impact on you whether or not you realize it.
Mm-hmm.
So being increasing your self-awareness is increasing your mindfulness and your consciousness of what is happening to you. You're living being, and you're in an environment with other living beings and things that are happening. So if you think that every single day you're not picking something up, or your brain isn't registering something, then you're fooling yourself. These things are happening constantly, and you have to be in self, to me, self-awareness, that you're constantly checking in. So for me, I have my own process how I see it of something is happening, and we'll get into this because emotional awareness is a great path towards self-awareness. Because if something comes my way and makes me feel something, then there's something to be explored there. So can you tell us more about that?
Definitely. Yeah, this is such a big topic to me, actually, because all my journey of self-exploration started with exploring my emotions. I guess there is a lot of, like, when people hear self-awareness, maybe a lot of people think about thoughts and kind of introspecting and discovering our beliefs about ourselves, this kind of intellectual plane. But I have found that staying in that plane and trying to analyze and understand myself, it's very often it just makes me spin in circles. So to me, exploring my emotions instead on that felt physical level, like with attaching as few concepts to them as possible, but just that pure feeling in the body, it often feels more productive in understanding myself in the long run. So it's like when I explore my emotions in the moment, maybe I don't quite understand why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling. I mean, sometimes it's quite obvious, like jealousy tends to be quite an obvious emotion, why it happens and what's the situation that triggered it. But I have found myself in situations that, I should be happy, by all means, I should feel excited and hopeful, yet I'm feeling something different. And I think that these are places that are particularly interesting, because then to go into these feelings, you kind of have to put aside what you believe should be happening. Because I guess this is what makes self-awareness hard, is that we have a certain set of beliefs of how we should be in what situations, like certain expectations. But then if we really listen to the feelings, very often, or I don't know how often for other people, but it seems like for everyone it happens from time to time that the feelings surprise us. And I have found that observing that and staying with the feeling one time, two times, like over and over, coming back to this as a practice, reveals patterns in my behavior feeling, my patterns that I go through, like overall, in my life experience, that I wouldn't be able to see if I was just in my head analyzing intellectually. It sounds a bit cryptic what I'm saying right now. Like I wonder how much people can relate to this, but I imagine that at least those who have done some of this kind of work, like body work, meditation, feeling into their bodies a little bit more, might resonate with this. Like to me, this is something that is
Yeah, It's extremely challenging. So I'm very self-aware, and I I do know when I'm clicking into trying to mentally make sense of things versus just sitting, like you said, in the emotions and the feelings. And then usually they can be identified somewhere on your body.
Mm.
And then, it kind of letting it unravel itself. So, we feel things for a very short amount of time, and if you want to feel it longer, you're choosing to then sit in that feeling. So you can choose to let things go, which I think is very healthy, but there are times where you do want to sit and understand, especially like you saying, when there's a big disconnect but what you thought you were going to feel and what you're feeling.
Mm.
And then and it's sometimes the more you learn, the more complicated things get, because a lot of that is also generated from neurotransmitters in your brain, right? So whether you release more serotonin, more dopamine, and other, brain chemicals, that causes you to feel certain things. So if your expectation doesn't meet what you're looking for, then you're not getting the dopamine hit. So then you're feeling a different things, and you're like, I shouldn't be feeling this much. And what is it, all about? But I
Yeah,
think go
sorry.
ahead.
I feel like, yeah, we do this as almost like creating a secondary feeling to what we already feel, because we don't agree with what's happening. And I think this is what you described. And then there's the secondary process of releasing a certain hormone, maybe from our brain, and then we can get confused because we are trying to argue with reality, and we just put layers of new emotions over those primary emotions, and then it can get a bit complex.
So I think if you just sit with it initially, let it, speak to you what it has to say, and then you learn from it, and then you move from it, then you avoid going into too deep of a logical cycle with it, where now you're going to end up sitting with it a lot longer than you need to, and it's probably going to leave you more confused instead of providing you the insight that you're looking for. So I think, there's it, for me, it's interesting is some of the study results, my initial reaction is counter to what the results are, because I feel like they're dealing with people who aren't self-aware. So how can you do a study on self-awareness unless the individuals are highly self-aware to begin with, right? And because I think the vast majority of people, in fact, lack self-awareness because they operate on autopilot. And then that ties into then mindfulness. So can you talk a little bit more on the practice of mindfulness and how that's important in self-awareness?
Hmm. To me, mindfulness is like I call it a sub skill of self-awareness. It's this, I mean, it's much more, but in the context of self-awareness, I see it as a sub skill, as this cognitive tool that allows us to decide where we direct and keep our attention, basically. So it's something that it's like a muscle of the mind or of the brain that we can train with, for example, meditation, because our default wiring as animals that we are is that we tend to get distracted, and we tend to get attracted by novelty, and we have some of those biases that cause our attention to be all over the place, because that was more beneficial evolutionary when our circumstances were a bit different. But now, when we have so many information, as you said, coming in, and so many stimuli and so much happening around us, this very often makes us not pay attention to anything in the end, because we are just all over the place. And I find that to become self-aware, so for example, staying with that emotional awareness, it's to stay with that feeling or to explore that feeling, we have to be able to decide that we are going to observe it and stay with that decision in the first place. So that's the matter of keeping our attention in one place. Yeah, and it's, to me, it seems like it's pretty much like training a muscle. So sitting in meditation and allowing the mind to drift away when it does, because it always does, and then bringing it back, and then it drifts away, and then bring it back. And again, this attitude of loving kindness and self-compassion, and like it's more like inviting that attention to stay where we want it to stay more than forcing, and again having this kind of aggressive quality towards ourselves, because I have found that this has never worked for me. The only thing that works is kind of just rewarding myself for when I do well, and forgiving myself when I don't do as well, or yeah. So yeah, for me that's mindfulness in that context, just being able to pay attention to what we choose to, and ideally being able to focus on one object of our attention while keeping the vast awareness of, like, the background awareness they call it in Buddhism. So it's like there are two sides of it, that there are two aspects of our cognition that interact: one pointed attention, and then more like a scanner, knowing, having a general idea of where we are, our space, how our body feels, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I think for me, I'm still working on practicing having better meditation practices. But for me, I practice mindfulness every time I have a new experience, because mindfulness, like you described it, what you said, it is about being in the moment where you're internally mindful, but if you're doing something you've never done before, which now your brain has to pay attention, so it can be very difficult to reach mindfulness through meditation, because your brain does wonder. But when you're doing something you've never done, your brain actually tunes into what you're doing, especially for certain things that might require higher skill or have some danger aspect to it, because it's new. It has to pay attention, and in that moment you really get to be present, and you get to feel how you feel just about that moment. And that one is precious. Two, it kind of pauses time, which is an incredible kind of superpower when time feels suspended. And then it makes you very aware of what you like, what you don't like, and what you embody in that moment. And I think capturing, being in that moment, and afterwards being able to remember it and capture, what was it about, what came to the surface for you, and because you'll never get to relive that particular moment again, because that's the thing with new experiences. Once you've done it, the next time will not be as powerful. So it's one of the things that I love to do, to find myself in that state. And I think fear also has an ability to do that, to really focus you in, make you mindful of what's happening, and definitely what you're feeling and why you're feeling that. So tell me, let's go back a little bit in time. So and for your experience, and as it grew, so that people are, what are some ways for them to raise their self-awareness? So you mentioned in the book, and you talk about going on your personal odyssey, right? So traveling, so tell us a little bit more how you came about to that point, and how that was a transition time for you and your self-awareness.
So that's a big chapter of my life, so I cannot talk about it all, but I would like to speak to what you just said about first time experiences, actually, because a lot of my journey of self-discovery and that personal odyssey, as I call it, was about traveling and working in different countries, in different places. I worked with disabled people. I worked in a hotel. I worked digitally. I worked in a few places. And one experience that definitely contributed a lot was spending a lot of time in nature in the French Alps. And that actually has a lot to do with the first time experiences. So at the time I was working with, it was a lady who owned the place, but also she was a coach, and she called herself a nature coach. So she used nature and experiences in nature, and very often first time experiences for people, and like this kind of on the edge experiences, where she would take them on a via ferrata, like this climbing walk, but really like a climb, like quite an edgy thing. Or she would take them skiing, or she would take them hiking, or while swimming, something that's very very sensual actually when you interact with nature. So yeah, I guess I experienced it a few times working with her, and just observing what happens when I enter a first time experience, or yeah, like an experience that puts me in the present moment. So for example, through this nature coaching, we were doing this exercise when we first walked on that very very rocky slope, when you really had to be careful not to fall. And then she was asking me to observe how my balance is, how my body is, and then observe the transition from going there to going on a very smooth path. And it was very immediately, I realized how my attention shifts. Like when I was on the rocks and I had to pay attention, I was in my body, I was present, I was paying attention. And then going on that path, and it was a well-known path actually. So the slope was the first time, it was my first time being there. I didn't know the terrain, I had to pay attention. And then going on the path, 1 minute into it, I was on autopilot already. Like I didn't pay attention to what's around me. I was just walking because it was easy. And what this was just one of the experiences we had, like this kind of training repeatedly. And what I realized is that from this kind of very simple physical, often first time experiences, it's a very good playground, because you can, or I could, realize my patterns, like the patterns that I was adopting then were extending to other parts of my life. And I write about that in my book as well, actually. So when I go up the slope, for example, I tend to go fast and be like curious about what's around the corner, and not really thinking about all the way down that I will have to do. This kind of, and this translates to how I dive into new things in my life without thinking. Like there is something exciting, I just jump on the opportunity. But then to actually back out of it, so metaphorically go down the slope, it's very different. And when I'm in the mountains and I go down the slope, I'm super cautious. Like I'm always the last one if I'm walking in a group. I'm taking it very slow, and I was very curious to observe how those embodied experiences, so again, coming out of the head, out of the mind, and more into the body, how it can reveal certain ways of being in general, certain patterns that we adopt. So I'm not sure if this answers your question, because I wanted to just give one, like a specific example of how that self-discovery occurred.
Yeah, no, I love that, because I can absolutely relate to it because of the so many different experiences, so first times. And again, this is why when I say action-based self-development through first time in your experiences, this is the huge reason why, because they are so powerful in putting you in the moment and helping you raise your self-awareness, and in developing new thinking, like new patterns, and because you're telling your brain it has to pay attention. And then because you're in the moment, you're also part of the wiring of what that's going to look like, and the impact that it can have. And if you can definitely have a coach that's there with you, assisting you through that process, then they're bringing a level of conscious and understanding to it, instead of the natural pathway taking place. But that definitely sounds like that was very impactful. But being in new places, a new country, constantly doing new jobs, new environments, it makes you know what you like, what you don't like. It makes you very aware of who you are and what you're capable of. And that's extremely empowering. So the going on the journey of discovery, you're never too old to do it, and two, life is a lot more fun when that's a consistent thing that you do.
I feel like playing a bit of a devil's advocate here as well, like showing the other side of it, which I'm becoming very aware of recently, because I spend well, 5 years at least, discovering and putting myself in new situations constantly. Like on a regular basis, I would change my place where I live, I would change my circle of friends. And right now, for the first time, it feels like I could actually stay somewhere. But I have realized that I became, at least this is how I see it for the moment, that it's become a bit addictive also, that self-exploration. Like there are two sides. So I think,
Dopamine is what drives it. And yep.
yeah, that, but also I'm wondering about also escaping parts of yourself. So when you go and do things for the first time, it's a great way of discovering something that you didn't know. But I wonder, and I'm not saying it works like this, I'm just wondering at this point of my life, I'm wondering if it's also not a way of hiding from something that can only transpire when you stay in one place long enough. So it feels like these two things somewhat need to be in balance, at least in my life. Although I know that there are people who live their lives constantly on the go and that they are super happy and constantly discovering new things. But it feels like it's true, at least for some people, that yeah, there is something to be discovered with changing your circumstances, but there is also something to be discovered by making yourself stay in one place. Like this is how I feel at the moment.
So, two thoughts on that. One, it's funny because I agree and agree and disagree at the same time. So, what I've realized in my life, because I have constantly changed and always pursue new things and reinvented myself many times, that it's when I found myself back in similar circumstances, so in the familiar instead of, and I don't think what I did those things was to escape anything. Every time I found myself back in the familiar, though, it was where that allowed me to know if I had changed or not. So, and life always naturally took me back to the familiar. I think for me to then have the assessment of, okay, did that journey of all those first time in your experience and that growth and learning truly change me, right? So the personality trait that I was looking to change, like, so the self-development, self-improvement that I was after, the only way to know that it works is that you have to find yourself back in the same circumstances and be like, okay, but now I behave differently because I have truly grown. So that way you're not impacted by your circumstances, right? So who you bring into a circumstance then changes the circumstances instead of the circumstance changing who you are.
Mm, I like that. I like that. So having like benchmark in your life that allows you to reflect in a mirror.
Yeah. And what's crazy is I've never had to look to find myself back. Trust me, there are many times I'm like, how did I end up back here? Because I've been moving forward so much. How am I back here? And every time I found myself back here, wherever here was, it really gave me the opportunity to assess myself, to, again, to assess who I've become against the same circumstances. Am I still behaving the same? Or have I truly changed? And I think every time that I realized, yes, I have truly changed, then I was ready for my next push of growth. And that push of growth comes through those first time in your experiences. But I love how you highlighted that, because if it's not naturally occurring in your life, which life is beautiful in that, if it creates the possibility of that happening, but if it isn't, you're correct in that you probably need downtime of reassessment, like, so that, because it is, while it raises your self-awareness to constantly be having first time in your experiences, you are also growing, and it's hard to know just how much you've changed and grown unless you're in a stable environment to be able to assess that. I completely agree with that.
Yeah, and also the question of integration comes to mind for me. Like after intense periods of exploring and growth, it's very often felt necessary for me to settle and have this boring period, which was really boring on the outside because I wasn't very active socially. I wasn't seeing many people. I was for example, I had this one very boring job where I was just writing very standardized text for 3 months, I think, something like a very boring period of my life. But it happened after a year and a half of very intense transformation. And from hindsight, I can see that this time, well, like downtime, like you said, was very necessary to allow those things to settle and realize what happened, what I learned. So yeah, I feel like, at least for me, I cannot constantly be on the go and exploring, just because, yeah, I want to reflect on what happened as well.
Yeah. And well, and again, the beauty, because I mean, 2020, you know, the pandemic paused everyone and put everyone in a place of reflection, where some people are going to, you know, some people want to avoid the period of reflection and want to constantly keep going. But, you know, if you are on the true path of, you know, self-awareness, self-enlightenment, self-development, then you, yeah, I completely agree that you do need those pauses. And if you're co-creating with life, you're engaging in living, life is going to give you those opportunities. Like I said, life gave the opportunity to basically the entire world. So that is just telling, and what the world, you know, needed in one way, depending on, again, your views. And I think we share the same. I don't know if the audience does or not, but you know, there are forces at play that are there to assist us in what we are trying to achieve. The goal is to you have to tap into living in order to tap into those forces.
I love that. And also it brings, I don't want to also change the course of your interview. So am I free to speak, or do you want
No,
to
go for it.
Yeah, it also brings up this idea of self versus non-self. So somehow self-awareness also very indicates that we are separate from everything, which in a way we feel separate and we are our own beings, and that's like one level. But then what it's interesting what you mentioned about co-creating with life, because this is, I guess, something that, like, this is a new kind of terrain for me, so I don't feel very qualified to speak about it yet. But I start sensing that it's not just about being aware of myself as this separate human being, but it's also about seeing the bigger picture. So really trusting life. You use that expression, like really living your life, really going into what's in front of you right now, and, for example, co-creating with other people, because there are these narratives in the self-improvement space, for example, that you have to be with the right type of people that will fuel your potential, and it's almost like you have to be very selective about where you put yourself. Like, you have to have a lot of control around where you put yourself, like which environment, optimize your work environment, optimize your circle of friends, optimize your morning routine. It's like, and I've fallen into that trap, definitely, of like optimizing everything in your life for growth, which, again, it's not like it's a bad idea entirely, but it can be a trap in the sense of not seeing the possibilities that are already given with the people that, you know, from this self-improvement perspective, that they might be dragging you down or something like this. But I found that sometimes those people they appear to be dragging me down because they trigger me a lot, and they trigger me a lot because they reflect something inside of me that I haven't been able to see and integrate, like this shadow self, basically. So I'm still not, like, I'm a bit ambiguous on that, like, how much do we need to be in charge of our own personal journey and create all those great conditions for ourselves, and how much are we just, can we just relax into what is, and explore those possibilities that we already have in our current circumstances.
I love that you brought that up, and I think it's something that, as you're on your journey, which the why is self-awareness so important, is because your journey not entirely the same as mine, right? It's not, there's so much that is similar to it, but then there's so much that is different because, you know, we do have different triggers, we have different backgrounds, we have different experiences, we have different goals and all of that. And, you know, I do preach that. I am in the self development industry, and I do preach that hey, you have to find your own solution. You have to find, you know, your own journey. You have to create that, and that's why you have to be self-aware, because otherwise you probably are going to follow somebody else or the wrong person, or you've been following your parents, or you've been following, you know, whatever that is not you. I know you talk about the true self in your book and so many other things, but fortunately, time is flying by. And I feel like I could keep talking to you for hours.
Maybe we can save the book for like a separate conversation, because we haven't really touched that. And
No, yeah.
I've been enjoying it a lot.
And there's but I do, so I do want to say, I do want to encourage the audience to get the book. For me, and again, I've been studying self-awareness forever, and I had it was a very interesting read, and it put things in different perspective, especially around the ego. So it's called Ego Friendly: Stop Treating Your Ego as the Enemy and Let It Guide Your Spiritual Growth. So Marta, how can people get in touch with you, find you, and get the book?
Well, I invite everyone to the Self-Awareness blog, which is exactly typed exactly as it sounds. So it's selfawareness.blog. And from there you can find me pretty much anywhere on social media. You can find a contact form and send me an email, and there's also a tab for the book that allows you to buy the book in PDF or in Mobi format. I have been resting with putting the book on Amazon, but I don't like the idea of supporting Amazon that much, I suppose. So it's there on my website.
All right. Well, awesome. Thank you for this incredible conversation. And we need we need to talk about this stuff a lot more.
Yeah, maybe a second episode will come up at some point. Thank you so much, Anne. It was a pleasure, a very inspiring conversation. I'm really glad to be here with you.
Awesome.